We tend to live in an environment of sound bites. Because we have such a frenetic environment, we tend to solidify our thinking and then move on. And so we form thought paradigms which allow us to get through our lives, and we become a little bit too rigid in the way we view information. And so Beyond Neanderthal was conceived on the assumption that we have a blank piece of paper. Let's not start with any preconceptions at all. Let's see if we can research evidence going back as far back into history as we need to determine whether there were any clues which would point us in a direction of solving the problems which we have, or which we're experiencing in the world today. I think most people will have heard of the year 2012 in the context of the Mayan calendar, in that the Mayan calendar appears to end on that date. And people are asking, is that the end of the world, or is that the end of an epoch, or what is that? And there's a lot of dogma associated with this, because nobody really knows what it really means. One of the things that I tried to do in writing Beyond Neanderthal was to see how, if I went back into history, were there any dots that I could connect which would lead to an understanding of that particular date. What does it mean? And I found a surprising number of references which all converge on the year 2012. In modern day, day-to-day experience, the year 2012 has a highly significant relevance from the perspective that it is the forecast year in which the next 11-year sunspot cycle is going to peak. In the mathematical modeling that the various solar scientists are bringing to bear on the activities within our sun, 2012 happens to be the peak of the next cycle. There is a theory called the Olduvai theory, which looks at energy per capita. When I started to examine this theory, because I've been looking at peak oil and coal and alternative energies, that the Olduvai theory predicts that 2008 will be the year in which the per capita energy availability in the world peaks, and that it will start to deteriorate from next year. And 2012, in terms of the Olduvai theory, is the year in which the world population starts to decrease as a result of our running out of energy. If you look at a chart of the Dow Jones Industrial Index and you draw various trend lines going back to the year 1920, you find a very strange phenomenon in that there's a convergence of trend lines, and they all meet, or they both meet in fact, they're two very important trend lines. They both meet in the year 2012. So it seems as if there's quite a lot of coincidences. When you go back into history, you discover that the ancient religions all talk about the beginning of an epoch. They don't use the same language, but they're referring to the same thing. The Surya Siddhanta, which is an Indian document which I think was documented after the death of Christ, but referred to information that was made available before that, pinpoints the beginning of the current epoch at 3102 BC. The Mayan calendar pinpoints the beginning at 3114 BC. The Hebrew calendar appears to go back much further, but there seems to have been a misinterpretation of the people who were the scribes of the document when they tried to apply the information that was available to them to determine the ages of people like Noah and Methuselah. They used an incorrect numbering system. A scientist had looked at what he thought may have been the era of Noah, had identified certain information, and identified a particular individual where he existed at a time of a flood, which could have been the Noah's flood. And up to the time of that flood, there was a numbering system. The Sumerians used a particular numbering system. And after the time of that flood, a different numbering system came into use. If you apply the previous numbering system, you find that the adjusted birth date of Adam was 3113 BC. And we've got the I Ching, for example, which has got some codes embedded in them, where a fellow by the name of Terence McKenna cracked one of the codes, applied a computer algorithm to those codes, and it came up to the exact same date as the Mayan calendar end date, which was the 21st of December 2012. It appears that there are cycles which the ancients must have known about. We have a tendency to write these people off as being superstitious and unsophisticated. And my view is that if one takes the assumption, or one makes the assumption that we are a little bit too egocentric in our thought processes, and it may be that in the 4.5 billion years of the history of this planet, there have been a waxing and waning of growth of civilizations. It may be that the information that they had access to then was beyond what we know now, that those documents contain very important pieces of information which could assist us in coping with what we're going through now. Clearly, those old documents were anticipating what we're going through now. And when we talk about the use apocryphal language about end of days or messianic age, I think we need to dispense with the dogma and say, well, what does that really mean? And it may mean that we're coming to the end of an epoch. And it may mean that we need to look into those documents for clues as to how we should behave. So if we are thinking that we're going to combat the forces which are giving rise to climate change, we're just dreaming. What we need to do is adapt our behavior such that it's a given that there will be climate change. Now, what do we do about it? How do we behave in such a way that we can survive it? And I believe that there is information of extreme value in those old documents which will point us in that direction.